Why is 2023 such a huge year for TCU football and the future of the program? We'll talk about that next. It's Locked On Horned Frogs.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
That's right, Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. Let's keep pushing that subscriber number up on YouTube. We're at 677. We're getting close to 700, which is really cool. Also available wherever it is you get your podcasts and its audio variety. I'm your host, Ian Simcox. So someone messaged me on Twitter last night. Today I'm going to talk to you about why this upcoming football season for TCU is so pivotal. And a few days ago, I spoke with Alex Frank, who's a friend of the show, and he mentioned this. He was like, hey, there's a lot of attention on TCU right now. There's a lot of recruiting momentum. We discussed, the four-star guys that committed in the 2024 class. Kyle Baker from Brownsboro, the wide receiver. Also got a couple 2025 commits, four-star players, and Ty Hawkins, the quarterback from San Antonio, and then Adrian Wilson, the wide receiver from Pflugerville. And last season was amazing. This year is the chance to follow up. And I hope this person doesn't mind me sharing a direct message they sent me on Twitter. But Sonny Dykes Burner on Twitter messaged me and said, what does TCU need to do to not slip into irrelevance? So much publicity last year that really shined a spotlight on the program. Would hate to see that fade. I'm sure TCU fans are unsure about what this program can do moving forward. So good question. How do you stay relevant? And the simple answer is you win. You look across college football, there's really two ways to be relevant in college football. The first one is the more traditional one, which is to win. You win games and you're in. I guess three. We can talk about three. You win games and you're in. Now, there are certain programs that have a rich history, have a lot of media around the program, a lot of media attention around the program, and they will be relevant, so to speak, regardless of what their season looks like. Texas comes to mind. USC comes to mind. Michigan, Ohio State, Alabama, some of the stalwart programs that have been around for so long, and Notre Dame, that will always just be a huge part of the national discussion and the national media narrative. I would say historically TCU is not in that camp. They're going to get attention when they win, and when they're not a factor, when they're, a borderline bowl team or a team that's fighting for bowl eligibility or worse, it's not a team that's going to be talked about much. The other way, if it's not winning, if it's not being a traditional blue blood program, is to just have a lightning rod of a head coach. It's a personality who draws a lot of attention. I know people are going to call me a hater for this because I've been kind of tough on Colorado this offseason. I think I've been fair about it. I think Colorado's eventually going to be really good under Deion Sanders. I just think it's going to take time. But Deion Sanders is a polarizing figure. He is a huge name. He's an NFL Hall of Famer. He went straight into the coaching ranks from the TV world, went right into Jackson State, turned that thing around, got this job at Colorado, talks a huge game, is very confident. He's accomplished a lot in life. I understand why he's confident. He rubs some people the wrong way because he's an outsider. He's not your traditional college football coach. He is doing it in a different way than we have seen before. He's very public about what he's doing, why he thinks it's effective, why he thinks it's right. And so he is a topic of conversation. I know if I want clicks, I can do a video about Colorado football if it somewhat relates to TCU, and I will get a lot of attention on that because he drives conversation. Lane Kiffin in a similar light. He's a funny guy. I think he's really leaned into. He sort of got this reputation, back to his days at Tennessee and then with the Raiders and at USC as just kind of a goofy dude who did his own thing and was very outspoken and was somewhat arrogant. And he's leaned into that. He's kind of leaned into the villain role at Ole Miss. He knows that that's a program with a lot of resources that wants to be good, that wants to be flashy. And he's trying his best to bring that to Ole Miss. All due respect, Sonny Dykes is not that guy. And I say that in a positive way, not a negative one. I love Sonny Dykes. I think he's a great culture fit for TCU. He's really good with the media. He's a very nice, affable person. I feel like he's got a real good kind of laid-back persona that works well for him. And it shined last year as they got a lot of attention as they were winning games. But, he's not going to be a super polarizing figure. He's not going to be someone who's out there just talking up a storm and trying to drive attention. He wants that attention to be focused on his football team. So this is a huge year for TCU, because as high as that mountain was that they climbed last season by getting to the national championship game, they're still fighting this belief around the country that maybe they didn't belong there, even though that's silly because we know they beat Michigan. But there's that kind of, in some ways, it's not even an undertone. It's very publicly people are saying that. But, the idea of either publicly or kind of with backhanded compliments saying maybe TCU didn't deserve to be there. And then there's also just the belief that they were a flash in the pan. You look at the over-under win totals, most of them are 7.5. Nobody's really picking them to win the conference title game. And I get it. They lost a lot from last year. They lost a lot of production from last year. But I think if you polled, people at large, they would say they don't really expect TCU to be near as good as they were this past season. And so for this TCU football team and for the program moving forward, the way to stay relevant and the way to grab the attention of recruits is to keep winning games, to steady this ship and keep it moving. Because the other thing we have seen in college football is this can flip on its head quickly. Recruits, current players, they're all very fickle. They will move on to the next thing quickly. You look at the two teams that were in the Big 12 championship game 2 years ago, Oklahoma State and Baylor. Great game. Baylor ends up winning at the goal line. Oklahoma State had a great season. They go on to win a big bowl game against Notre Dame. Baylor wins a Sugar Bowl against Ole Miss. Next year, Baylor goes 6-7. Suddenly, Dave Aranda is not the genius that everybody thought he was. They lose some players to the portal. They lose some talent to the NFL draft. And, they can try to make this up by having another good year, but they have largely fallen out of the conversation. Same thing with Oklahoma State and Mike Gundy's squad. They come off a really good season. They win a Bedlam game a couple of years ago against Oklahoma. Last year, a lot of injuries, a lot of issues down the stretch. They fade as the year goes on, and then you see just a mass exodus in the portal, and they're trying to kind of pick up the pieces and move that roster forward and get it together. But if you look right now at this 2025 class, which I know, looking at team rankings for that class right now is insane. There's 2 commits for TCU's class, but they're number 7 in the country. They landed 2 big-time 4-star talents. 2024, they've got some good momentum right now. They're starting to get more highly touted players. How do you keep that moving? By winning games. You want players coming on official visits in October and November to the Carter for big-time football games, sold-out stadium that mean a lot in the Big 12 standings. And when Texas and Oklahoma leave, as many of you know, there is going to be a void. Maybe not for, I guess in Oklahoma's case, it's kind of for the supremacy of the conference, even though OU has not been the Big 12 big dog the last couple of years. And with Texas, it's the team that people talk about the most. But, either way you slice it, there is a big void left by those 2 schools. And there's been so much discussion since it's been announced with those 2 leaving the SEC. Who's going to take over? Who's going to be the team that takes over? Is it just going to be something that cycles year to year, or could you see one dominant fixture? I think with the resources TCU has, I feel like with the coaching staff TCU has, with the location that TCU is in the middle of the Metroplex, with access to a ton of great players, they could be the team that takes over this thing and takes the reins as the preeminent force in the new look Big 12. But you have to keep winning to do it. How do you stay relevant? You must keep winning. You must keep forcing people to talk about you in a positive light. And they can do that this year. I think the schedule is really tough at the end of the season, but I think the first 6 or 7 games are very manageable. I feel like they've tried to replace this roster in the best way that they can. And I feel good about TCU football moving forward, but you have to keep it up. And what happens when and if you hit adversity? What happens when you drop 2 games in a row for the first time in the Sonny Dykes era? How do you respond? How do you show that you are the team to beat in this new era of college football, in this new era of the Big 12? I think TCU has an opportunity to do that, but this will be a pivotal year in showing people that last season was not just a flash in the pan where you won a lot of close games and everything broke right for you. It was a picture of what the consistent ceiling for this team and this program could be. They have now been in the Power 5 for almost a decade, and you are seeing the fruits of many years of labor to get to this point. It's a huge year for TCU football, and think they'll be up to the task. When we come back, TCU baseball, a big-time name, is rumored to be linked to the Frogs. We'll talk about that next. This is Locked On Horned Frogs. FanDuel, MLB season is in full swing. Rangers win tonight. I'm recording this on Tuesday evening. They get a victory over the Tigers. I believe that final score was 5-3. If you want to start betting on these MLB games, go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. You can take advantage of their no sweat first bet deal. Get up to $2,000 in bonus bets. What does that mean? You can put as little as $5 down. And if you lose that first bet, you can possibly get up to $2,000 in bonus bets courtesy of FanDuel. Not as big of a risk as maybe you might think it is on paper. They also have a safe, secure, and easy-to-use app. You're going to watch sports. You're watching baseball. You're getting ready for college football season. Why not take a dive in there and try to make some money? Safe, secure, easy-to-use app. Also, FanDuel.com/lockedon, official betting partner of the MLB. We've said it in each part of the season. Official betting partner of the NBA, the NFL, and now Major League Baseball. FanDuel. Proud sponsor of the Locked On Network. Segment 2 here on Locked On Horned Frogs, and I haven't talked about this much yet because there's been a lot of smoke around it, but it hasn't really been made public. But today we got some more clarity, at least that this player is officially now in the transfer portal. TCU baseball is trying to add talent. They added a big two-way player today that we're going to talk about in segment 3, Peyton Tolle from Wichita State. But there's a pitcher at Tennessee. His name's Chase Burns. And if you watch the college baseball postseason, you might have seen a highlight of Chase Burns in the Super Regionals. They went down to Hattiesburg and played Southern Miss on the road. And in game 2 of that series, he had a huge strikeout late in the game. He was a reliever for most of the year for Tennessee and was fantastic for them down the stretch in their run to Omaha as well. And he strikes out a Southern Miss player on a 2-strike fastball that touched 102 on the gun. And he just goes crazy on the mound. I mean, he is yelling, screaming. He does like a throat slash gesture on the way off the field and gets to the dugout and hypes everybody up. And it was a really cool moment within the postseason. Chase Burns was one of the best pitchers in the nation last year. Now, if you look at just the pure numbers, you might sit there and say, what are you talking about? Because his ERA ended up at 4.25 for the year. But listen to this. Over 72 innings, Chase Burns struck out 114 batters on the season. And I talked about it earlier, touching 102 on the gun. He's a guy that hits 100 pretty consistently. He's also got a nasty slider to go with it. He filed paperwork to enter the portal, I believe, on Friday. And as of Tuesday morning, it was official that he was there. And on Twitter, on 247 Sports, Jamie Plunkett, a new addition there to Horned Frog Blitz, he was reporting this as well. Chase Burns is getting a lot of attention and links to TCU. There are people that believe he could end up being a Frog, which it's unusual. I mean, TCU football landed some big-time transfer portal. They landed some big-time players in the transfer portal, JoJo Earl, John Paul Richardson. But a lot of those guys were big-time high school players, maybe not a ton of production at the college level, and we're coming back to the DFW area to play for TCU. The big-time established, transfer targets that command a lot in the portal from an NIL perspective, TCU, I think, is struck out on for the most part. But Chase Burns is a huge name. Now, there's other schools involved here. Vandy's involved. LSU is rumored, and they have deep pockets. I'm not sure what's going to happen. But word on the street is that Chase Burns, a big part of this, is he wants to move into a starting role. He wants to be a starter. He's projected to be a first-round pick next season. And so if you landed him, and if Kirk Saarloos agreed that, yes, I would give you an opportunity to start, you could potentially talk about a rotation of Chase Burns, Cole Klecker, maybe Ben Hampton, the WVU transfer, maybe Luis Rodriguez, who did a really nice job for you last year, potentially Chase Hoover, who had a nice freshman season, maybe Cademan Parker, who's coming off Tommy John surgery and has a ton of potential. There's a lot of pitching depth there. I mean, that is a nasty 3 to 4 man rotation that you could feel pretty confident about, at least on paper, taking into the season and potentially the postseason. Now, a fascinating subplot to this is Burns was not happy about getting moved to the bullpen, but he really thrived in that role. He went through a rough stretch in the month of April where, I mean, to be honest, he just got shelled. Gave up 6 earned runs against Mizzou in 5 innings, 5 earned against Texas A&M in 5 2/3, 5 against LSU in 3 1/3, 7 earned against Florida in 3 1/3, and then they moved him to the bullpen, and he would pitch long outings out of the bullpen. I mean, he went 5 1/3 in relief against South Carolina, went 6 1/3 in relief against Clemson in a crazy game in the postseason, went 6 innings of shutout ball against Stanford. So you saw him rack up innings and throw a lot of pitches, but his ERA went up. He got hit pretty hard in that stretch in April. Now, I mean, you listen to those teams, Florida in the National Championship Series, LSU was in the National Championship Series, Texas A&M, was a postseason team. Those are good teams that he was facing in a week after week stretch. But still, those numbers were concerning. They moved him to the bullpen, which turned out to be a great move for Tennessee. And I guess Chase Burns wasn't totally happy about that. So it gives me a little bit of pause to put him in the starting rotation, given that he struggled last year. But I definitely wouldn't pass up a guy like this in the portal, because this is a game-changing player. And if they add him, which Wes Rucker, who covers Tennessee for 247 Sports, said after TCU baseball added Peyton Tolle, again, a two-way player, a pitcher and first baseman, and an everyday hitter for Wichita State. He said TCU's going all in, going to be a big portal year for that bunch. I do wonder, and I think there's still plenty of funds that are being allocated to football and basketball, but I do wonder if with the College World Series run last year and with how much people love baseball at TCU, if there are donors that after that crazy postseason run said, okay, I'm ready to do it. I'm ready to throw some money out there. I'm ready to try to load this team up for a potential run again next season. It would make sense. It would. I mean, it would make sense. Baseball is a sport where if you're willing to spend money and go get the guys, you can be successful. Now, it's a really hard sport to win a national championship in. You have to win a regional, you have to win a super regional, and then you have to go win in Omaha. It's tough to do, and it's not always the best teams on paper that get it done. I guess you could say, all in all, it kind of ended up being LSU, which going into the season appeared to be the best team on paper. But oftentimes it's just the team that's playing the best. But, man, that would be a big-time rotation if they could go get Chase Burns. And I'm curious if there are boosters and donors who look at what is going on in the world right now of NIL and say, you know what, if we decided we wanted to spend big money on this sport and just go get big-time players, then we could be super successful. And I think that's driving a lot of what's happening with TCU baseball. We'll wrap up with more baseball talk. We'll give you a update on just where they are and from a roster standpoint. We'll do that next. Again, this is the Locked On Horned Frogs. I talked about in the last segment, TCU lands Peyton Tolle, the transfer from Wichita State, one of the top players in the transfer portal. He's a two-way player. Now, the first thing I noticed about Peyton Tolle is he is a big young man, 6'6", 250. That is a large person. He'll be a junior next year, has 2 years of eligibility left. Last season had a 4.56 ERA. In 26 starts, finished with a 9-3 record. Excuse me, that's his career stats. Last season finished with a 9-3 record in 15 appearances, had 10 Ks per 9 innings and just 19 walks in 85 2/3 innings pitched. He also hit .311 in the batting average department and had 13 bombs. Brings power to the table when he's not playing or when he's on the mound, he's not pitching. He plays first base and can be a DH. And so you bring in a big bat. You also bring in a guy that can be part of your rotation or potentially could be part of your bullpen. This is a huge pickup. It'll be fun to have a two-way player on the roster. TCU has not had that in a long, long time. It's also just great to have a big bat because you're losing a lot of talent off this team. I assume. We don't know anything official yet. Braden Taylor's gone. He's going to be a first-round pick. He's out of here. There's a bunch of other players that could get drafted. We could see Trey Richardson get drafted. We could see Cole Fontenelle get drafted. Elijah Nunez is draft eligible. Curtis Byrne could go in the draft. Or maybe Curtis Byrne looks around because he ended up being a DH for most of the year instead of catching because Carson Bowen was such an outstanding player as a freshman that he ended up kind of taking the lead with that catching role and running with it. So you need position players, and you get Peyton Tolle who could play first base, who can DH, or who can pitch either in the rotation or in the bullpen. Really nice pickup by TCU baseball. They also got a transfer from Pepperdine. Jack Basser was a freshman last year. He hit .345, only had 5 home runs, 34 RBIs, but again, another big-time hitter. He spent most of the year at first base and DH. Now, it was said that he played third base a lot in high school and feels comfortable there. So, in theory, I guess could replace Braden Taylor. We'll see where the staff ends up putting him. But TCU baseball doing a really nice job in the portal. And if they could find a way to add Chase Burns, it would be a huge haul in the portal this offseason. As far as guys that are departing, the 3 players that I know of that have announced, Owen Blackledge, who is the son of Todd Blackledge, the college football analyst for ESPN. He will be hitting the transfer portal. Owen didn't really play a whole lot, so not a huge surprise that after 2 seasons he's going to move on. Wish him the best. And then David Bishop also in the portal. David, sort of fell out of the lineup this season, but, as a freshman a couple of years ago, he was great. You could argue he was their second best hitter behind Braden Taylor. Especially in the first half of the season, his freshman year. And so wishing him the best as well. I think David's a guy that could really benefit from maybe just a change of scenery, change of pace. And if he finds a swing again, then he could be a special talent. And then River Ridings, who at one time was TCU's closer as a freshman and was the main guy they used at the bullpen. Or I guess he was a setup guy for Hillengrain as a freshman. A sophomore year, he started as a closer and then sort of fell out of that role. But anyway, was a bullpen guy they used a lot the first couple of years on campus. Did not feature him much this season after, the first kind of third to half of the season. And so he'll look elsewhere. So you lose some guys, you gain some guys. That's, baseball now and college sports in general. We'll keep track of that as much as we can here on Locked On Horned Frogs. We'll be back in on Friday. We'll wrap the week with another show. It's Locked On Horned Frogs. It's your team every day.